Hey everyone, welcome to the Commander Table. My name's Dennis, and this is the first of many sweet deck techs that I plan on bringing to this channel. Today, we're going to talk about my Yidris Maelstrom Wielder deck. Here he is. Yidris is a very powerful commander, and pretty popular. If you've seen him on the other side of the table, you might associate him with Storm, or getting buried under tons of card advantage. There are lots of different ways to build around Yidris. He's super flexible, offers a ton of options. But to explain how I built this particular deck, you first have to know that I actually didn't build this deck around Yidris. I built it around this card. Omen Machine is a crazy card, and you can find one in just about any LGS's Junk Rares box. It's a 6-mana artifact that reads, "Players can't draw cards." At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player exiles the top card of their library. If it's a land card, the player puts it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, the player casts it without paying its mana cost, if able. Note that the player doesn't get a choice whether or not they cast it. If they flip it, they cast it. It can make for some memorable games. But for now, I want to bring your attention to that first line of text. Players can't draw cards. There are only a few cards in Magic that have this kind of effect. And as you've probably noticed by now, commander decks want to draw a lot of cards in the course of a game. In fact, they need to if they want to keep pace at the table. A well-known rule of thumb of commander deck building is that a deck should have about 10 cards that draw you more cards. Omen Machine shuts them all off. It is, however, a symmetrical effect. We can't draw cards any more than our opponents can. Unless, of course, we've built our deck around Omen Machine's restriction. And that's what my Yidris deck is all about. There isn't a single card in it that has the text, "Draw a card." Yeah, sure, I'm sure I could get away with a few if I wanted to, but you'll find that when I've chosen a theme for a deck, I commit. Alright, ready to dive in? Let's go. I know it's not the most exciting part of a deck tech, so I'll make this quick, but we're going to start with the ramp. If a deck is a house, ramp is its foundation, so we've got to make sure it's solid. My Yidris deck runs 14 pieces of ramp, which is a little higher than average, but believe me, this deck will use all of the mana you feed it. The type of accelerant used in this deck is pretty diverse. We've got some artifact-based ramp with Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, a couple Signets, and Chromatic Lantern, as this is a 4-color deck. We got land-based ramp with Exploration, Farseek, Rampant Growth, Sakura Tribe Elder, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Farhaven Elf, and Oracle of Moldiah. If your playgroup doesn't have any mass land destruction, feel free to swap out some of the artifacts with some cards like Nature's Lore and 3 Visits, and pair them with Shocklands if your budget allows it. As you'll see later, shuffle effects get a little more value in this deck because we have cards that care about what's at the top of our library. I also threw in Birds of Paradise because that card, yeah, it's just, well, really good. Moving on, we come to the second half of our foundation, card draw. Now, I have card draw in quotations because remember, we don't have any cards that actually draw us cards, but we do have cards that will get cards from our library into our hand, and that's an important distinction when there's an Omen Machine on the battlefield. First, we have some one-shot effects in Dig Through Time, Factor Fiction, and its creature form, Sphinx of Thune, as well as Manifold Insights. We also have a dash of card selection with Forbidden Alchemy and Impulse. That's a start, but this deck isn't going to get there with a handful of wannabe divinations. What we really need to get this deck humming are some card advantage engines. I'm talking about Rashmi, I'm talking about Outpost Siege naming Khans, I'm talking about Yidris himself. Also, let's cast some cards from our opponent's decks with Thief of Sanity and Stolen Strategy. These cards are so much fun, and make every game you play with them unique. Alright, we're getting there, but we're going to need access to even more spells if we want to win us some commander games, and here we look to the top of our library. Lots of cards let you play things from the top of your library, and they're all going in this deck because every time we get to play a card directly from the top of our library, we reveal the next card, and if we can play that, we reveal the next, and so on. Courser of Krufix and Oracle of Moldiah let us get lands from the top to the battlefield. Vizier of the Menagerie lets us cast creatures from the top. Melik Izzet Paragon gets his instants and sorceries in addition to doubling them. And Future Sight and Experimental Frenzy are our jacks of all trades. If we can cast 4 5 spells off the top of our library every turn. Who needs to draw cards? Drawing cards is for chumps. You know what's not for chumps? Ordering the top of our library so we can get the most of these effects. And that brings us to our next section, library manipulation. We've got Sensei's Divining Top, we've got Sylvan Library, we've got Brainstorm and Brainstorm variants like Jace, the Mind Sculptor, Dream Cache, and Riverwise Augur, but hold on. All of these cards draw cards. Okay, so we can't use those. If we want to stack the top of our library, we're going to have to use some other options. First, we have a pair of 2 helpful little 1-mana enchantments, Miri's Guile and Soothsaying. These come down for cheap, they keep the deck flexible, and they don't draw us cards. Second, we have our repeatable scry effects, Prognostic Sphinx, which gives us a respectable 3/5 flying body for 5 mana that comes with a little built-in protection, and Mystic Speculation, a sorcery with buyback that lets us scry 3 for every 3 mana we spend, which is a little mana intensive, but often difficult for our opponents to interact with. Finally, there's Scroll Rack, which at the time of this recording I don't yet have in my personal deck simply because it's a very expensive card. But it's a great fit for this deck. If you can afford it, I highly recommend adding one. So we've talked about the ways this deck can generate card advantage without actually drawing cards. So now it's time to talk about the other side of Omen Machine, the dark side. Card denial. If we can strip our opponent's hands away, they can't deal with our ever-growing board state while they're stuck flipping 1 card every turn. It's time to get mean with Sire of Insanity and Cabal Conditioning. Yeah, these cards aren't likely to make you any friends, but they are very effective. Once you've removed your opponent's hands and with them their hope, it's time to put them out of their misery. Let's start with Mana Flare. We wait until we're the only ones casting more than 1 spell a turn. Why not get crazy with it? Follow this up with a Mnemonic Betrayal, Worst Fears, or Villainous Wealth. If you want a more direct path to victory, you can try Torment of Hailfire. Bonus points if you cast any of these off the top when Melic's in play. Here's another way to end the game, Time Sifter. Time Sifter is a strange card, and in case you're unfamiliar, let me walk you through it. It's a 5-mana artifact that has all players play a game of war during each player's upkeep. The player who flips the highest converted mana cost off the top of their library is the one who takes the next turn. We have a lot of high CMC cards in this deck, and we can manipulate the top of our library, so let's see if we can string together a few consecutive turns and kill everyone. I don't know, sounds like a good time. Alright, the last few categories mostly round out the rest of the deck, and the exact selection of cards for these is less important than just making sure you have access to these effects. Board wipes. To handle creatures, we've got Damnation, Blasphemous Act, and Fire Covenant. Vandal Blast covers artifacts, and Devastation Tide resets the board. Other considerations for these slots might include Toxic Deluge, Last One Standing, and of course, Cyclonic Rift. Spot removal. I use Curtain's Call, Assassin's Trophy, Reality Shift, and Hull Breach. For a healthy dose of recursion, we're running Grade 1 of Marasa, Kess, Dissident Mage, Shieldred, Whispering One, Phyrexian Reclamation, Noxious Revival, and Reclaim. Our last few cards include Mystical Tutor to tutor up some of our Haymakers and put them on top, though I'll probably buy a Vampiric Tutor to fill this spot one day. Maybe. We've got Josh Lee Kwai's favorite, Vidalcan Orrery, as well as Alchemist Refuge because, well, he's right, they're really good. And finally, a bit of a pet card of mine, Trigon Predator, to help police the board of troublesome artifacts and enchantments. There's not too much to say about the land base, other than I kept mine pretty budget friendly. The most expensive lands I have in Yidris are the check lands. I also threw in some bounce lands and gain lands. One thing to keep in mind when building a mana base is that you want to skew it towards lands that produce the color that color fixes. For instance, I run 8 forests but only 1 mountain in this deck. Before I leave you, I want to touch briefly on the philosophy of deck building in Commander, or at least my philosophy of deck building in Commander. You may have noticed that this deck isn't the highest power level it could be, even within the no card draw limitation. I could have added Counter Magic, or Cyclonic Rift, or Demonic Tutor. And if you want to build a deck like mine and include those cards, that's totally fine. I have no issue with people playing with powerful cards like this, and I do have copies of these cards in some of my more powerful decks. The reason I haven't added them to Yidris is because I like where the deck is at. Some games I draw Omen Machine, but oftentimes I don't, and that's fine. As you move up the power scale in Commander, as you move from casual to focus to optimized, your decks will naturally become more consistent. But keep in mind that as you make those improvements, your variety of play will diminish. Games will play out the same more often as you add more tutors and redundant effects to your deck. Be conscious about what kind of play experience you want to have. I chose Yidris as my first deck to share on the Commander table because it's my go-to deck to pull out when I'm sitting down at a new or unfamiliar playgroup. I want people's first impression of me as a Commander player to be someone who wants to have fun, someone who builds crazy, creative, unique decks. And that's what I hope your first impression of this channel is too. Thank you for watching this episode of the Commander Table. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have one, I'd love to hear about your go-to deck in the comments. I have many other videos and deck techs in the works, so stay tuned for those. Till next time, go have fun.